Okay, I'm so excited to talk with you about this because I read this horrifying book, nice work of fiction that I discovered. And as I started reading it, I had no idea why I was sticking with this book. It was like a train wreck that I couldn't look away from. But as I started digging into it and it started revealing to me how complicated and horrifying it was, it began to unravel my complete understanding of reality and everything that is, and we must talk about it. Welcome to Star Potential, the podcast for curious, soul led humans who know there's more available. We want to explore it with depth, joy, and a little play. Here, we talk about reclaiming your authentic voice, shedding old identities, and expanding into who you're becoming without taking yourself too seriously. I'm your host, Julie Jo Hughes. Let's get curious, let it be fun, and see what ignites. Okay, so the book is called The Last House on Needless Street. And this was born from my desire to just let myself do some things that don't have an immediate return on investment. Joke's on me because this supposedly unproductive book just became an entire episode. Before I go any further, this episode contains conceptual spoilers for The Last House on Needless Street. I'm not going to tell you exactly who is who or how the story ends, but I am going to discuss one of its major psychological revelations. So if you want to experience the book completely blind, pause here, read it, and then come back. I'll be here. Okay, how I got from this book is highly disturbing and I can't believe I'm reading it, and I don't usually read stuff like this, to holy shit, that's everything I've been on the brink of understanding about the relationship to the micro and the macro, to who I am versus who we are as a collective, understanding what this human experience is. And I feel like this really fucked up book really helped me to see that. The Last House on Needless Street starts giving you these different perspectives from different characters, and you start wondering how on earth one character could treat another character in this way. And it just feels like sadistic, and you start realizing that many of the characters in the book are clearly suffering from a lot of trauma, and they have some issues because of it. But then it starts to reveal much, much more. And I will tell you that you start to see how many characters in the book have taken one understanding of reality and then filled in all these other little details around it to make that make sense. And then there were things that the characters were experiencing that they could not bear to experience, and so they either completely buried or stifled certain experiences, and then, like, invented other circumstances in order to continue on, to survive, basically. And so what this revealed to me first was it's kind of amazing and fascinating how the mind can do that in, yes, a trauma situation where we invent these details that aren't actually real in order to cope. But is it really that much different from what we're all doing every single day? Like, our brain is constantly looking for evidence that supports what we already believe, what we can accept as truth. And even on a much smaller scale, you can probably think of a bunch of examples, if you're willing, to look at your own life and see how something that you tell yourself is complete truth maybe isn't absolute truth. It's relative truth, right? Based on what you were able to accept, based on what you already believed, what made sense with the other stories you tell yourself, what matched with who you believe yourself to be, and who you believe you're in relationship to, and things like that. We kind of fill in the gaps sometimes with stories that makes sense to our sense of self, to our sense of survival, to what makes sense. So that was the first fascinating point that I took from this horrifying story. But then it got much deeper than that. As these characters, as it was revealed that the lengths their psyches had gone to invent these completely alternate senses of reality, once that became painfully clear, I actually could totally relate to when I lost my voice for 7 weeks, which is a story I've told many times on this podcast. But when I completely lost that sense of who I am, and I didn't really know how to continue on without that sense of self. It really felt like a death of some sort. You could call it an ego death, an identity death, but the reason why it felt like such a low point for me, and I ended up in this huge panic attack on my kitchen floor where as I felt like I was dying, everything that I knew was connected to my voice, and I really thought I might never get my voice again. And it really felt like some kind of death. There was enormous grief in it because I didn't know how to continue on without that version of myself. It was like, if that version of myself dies off, what is it that's left? Like, do I even know what's beyond all of that? Because it seemed like that was everything, you know? Um, and it gave me a fascinating opportunity to examine who am I without my voice. And this podcast was born and all these things. But as I'm going through this fictional story and I'm seeing what these characters have done in order to cope and to survive, as they come up against these walls where who I know myself to be, there's no way that identity can continue or it can't handle like the actual facts of what's happening. I started thinking, I'm no psychologist, but I'm fascinated by it. And is it Is it that much difference? What can happen in one physical human body, but one psyche, right, can actually split itself into different identities in order to try to cope with whatever you have to go through? Okay, quick disclaimer here. I'm not equating ordinary inner conflict with dissociative identity disorder. And I'm certainly not a psychologist, but the book made me think about integration and what I've read about it and what psychiatrists and psychologists often do with patients. It's not treating every identity as false, but building connection among the different parts. And I started wondering, is there a non-pathological version of that in all of us? It's really not about all of these being wrong and one of them being the true self underneath. Like there's a lot of self-development world talk that talks about really reveal your authentic self and be your authentic self. And I talk a lot here about finding and revealing your authentic voice. But it's actually a lot more nuanced than that. It's not like there's one hiding authentic you underneath all these expressions of yourself, and we have to get rid of all the false ones. I really don't think it's as simple as that. Even without something pathological happening here, we all have versions of ourselves that exist that seem to be incompatible with each other. Like the mother who wants her kids to always be first, and then also the lifelong performer who's always looking to expand and grow her career. Those could be butting heads, but not necessarily. I'm a mother. I'm also a child. I'm an ambitious person. I'm also a very spiritual person. The version of me who really likes attention and being the center of the room, and the person in me who really wants to have it not be about me. The person who was absolutely certain and had the pristine vision of what they want their life to look like, and also the person who has no idea what they want and is really just willing to take any breadcrumb that presents itself. So we have this tendency to narrate our growth as replacement. Like, I used to be that person and now I'm this person. But maybe it's actually about inclusion. Maybe our evolution is not about not being who we used to be, but including that version. Like, that's also part of the group that all lives here now. Like, there's all these different versions of ourselves, and I don't think the problem is that they all exist. It's that we forget that we all live in the same house. We're all inhabiting the same body. The problem is not that there's many versions of us here. The problem is that sometimes we're not willing to acknowledge and get along with each other. We don't acknowledge that all of these selves are real, and all of these selves believe all the circumstances or parameters around what they believe to be their existence. Which brings up another point, that when you think back about past versions of yourself or who I was back then, I think there's a tendency to say, that was the old me and I'm no longer her, or I've learned so much since that time and that's not who I am anymore. But is that really the healthiest solution? What if the most loving way to look at everything we've been through is cohabiting? What if all of those versions of yourself are still in there, and now we're just deciding when this one gets to take the lead and when this one gets to take the lead. But we acknowledge that we all have the same shared history. We all live in the same house. The book made me wonder whether this same pattern, separate parts forgetting that they belong to one whole, might repeat at larger and larger scales. Which brings me to the home run realization for this whole episode, which is this. I think that's really what humanity is. It's not just about someone with a dissociative disorder. It's not just about me having an identity crisis and experimenting with the old version of me and the new version of me and who is the true me underneath all of this. And if I lose my voice, who am I? Really, the question becomes, is this what the human experience is? Is it that even if we acknowledge that we're all separate from each other, are we actually all just separate expressions of some much bigger interconnected source that has the same shared memories, shared experiences, and we're all going through it at our different times and on our different through our different lens of understanding, and we're using our own separate bodies to go through this human experience. But if we could accept that we all live in the same house, whether that's planet Earth, the Milky Way galaxy, this universe, perhaps we would start to see that the problem isn't that we're different from one another. The problem is that we've forgotten that we all share the same house. We live in different rooms, maybe, but it's a shared space. And it just became fascinating to me that I think perhaps the next iteration of our evolution, or one of the iterations of our continued evolution, is an understanding like that. Maybe psychologists are beginning to understand it within the confines of one human body, and how the psyche can separate itself into these different rooms in order to try to understand itself. But really, the magic happens when those separate identities start to recognize each other as not being necessarily separate. This was a fascinating concept for me to grapple after reading this somewhat horrifying book. And if you have read it, I would love to hear your takeaways on this book. I had many, but that was one of the bigger ones for me. And so going forward, how we can use this, I think, is having more compassion for ourselves, not feeling the need to write off past versions of yourself, but integrating them. What did I learn from that version of myself? Can I possibly hold her with love and not say, she was an idiot, she made a lot of mistakes, she hurt people? But could I say, this is what this version of myself taught me about life? And I'm so grateful for the experiences that that version of me had because they were very meaningful. It brought me a lot of insight, it brought me a lot of experience, just like every other version of me did as well. And all of those versions of me still exist. It actually isn't helpful or loving of me to try to kill off those versions of me. Somebody asked me the other day, were you a wild child when you were a teenager? Yeah, a little bit. I was. I mean, everything's relative. I wasn't like crazy wild child, but yeah, there was a little streak there where my mom and dad probably thought, "What the hell? Where did this come from?" And I think I turned out all right, but yeah, I probably, put them through a little more stress than I needed to at times, and maybe every kid has that phase, I don't know. But is that version of me dead or gone? Well, no. Sometimes she still comes out after a couple drinks. I don't know. She's still in there. She still informs a lot of my decision making. Not just when I'm on some kind of substance, but there's certain people that when I hang around them, that version of me tends to come out a little bit more. And when I'm around other people, different versions of me tend to kind of rise to the surface. But none of those is not me. They're all like slightly different variations of the same house. And I think that even when we encounter people that rub us the wrong way, this is something I love to talk about, that's a beautiful invitation for you to reverse, look inward because, what is this person reflecting back about myself that I have rejected or that I don't want to look at or that I've tried to forget? So we offer each other a beautiful invitation to do that. But when we see something we really admire in someone else, that's also a reflection. We're also seeing something beautiful in them that we recognize as beautiful in us too. And the more and more that we can accept that we are just different expressions, but living in the same house, I think the quicker we'll stop hating each other, warring with each other, trying to prove ourselves more right than someone else, trying to prove someone else wrong, because they're all just different perspectives to consider. The thought I keep coming back to is this. No single room contains the whole house. No one version of me contains all of who I am. And no one person contains the whole truth of what it means to be a human being. We're all looking out through different windows, seeing one piece of the landscape and sometimes mistaking it for the whole view. So maybe wholeness isn't about getting every part of ourselves or every person in the world into the same room and making everyone agree. Maybe it's simply remembering that there are other rooms that exist and that they belong to the same structure, and maybe sometimes being willing to walk down the hall. And that is what this horrifying little book left me thinking about. Not bad for something I picked up just for fun. If something in this episode lit you up or sparked a little curiosity, you might be in the middle of a soul shift of your own. I created a free quiz called Are You in a Soul Shift? To help you explore where you are and what's opening next. Just go to juliejohughes.com/quiz or find the link in the show notes. And if you're enjoying the show, would you please leave a quick rating or review? It helps create a ripple to reach other curious souls. Until next time, stay curious and let yourself play.